on this computer. Welcome here, everybody. Pictures of raven chicks. That's what you're looking at there. Yesterday, I was out teaching in the snow, and this little butterbutt, I call them butterbutts, came flying right up next to me. That was really fun. Today is all focused on birds, and so I decided to open it up here with just pictures of birds, all different types of birds that I've been seeing around here.
You know, for our chat and welcome, Joe, maybe everybody should give us what is one of their favorite birds that they like to look for in any season. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I was thinking, what could we get them to put in the chat? I think that's it. Favorite bird, any season. If you could put that in the chat, that'd be great. And if everybody would pick ruby-throated hummingbird, then I would approve. I saw my first loon on Sunday.
Wow,
one of the
that's
season.
pretty sweet.
Yeah.
I always want to call these ring-billed, but they're ring-necked, right?
I know. Yeah. What a weird name, right?
David, do you know why they're called ring-necked and not ring-billed?
I think he's keeping it secret from you.
That's true. We have a hermit thrush for the ethereal flute song. Isn't that true?
Oh, who put that one? Because they're absolutely right. That was actually
Leanne Plinsky.
Thank you, Leanne. That's the bird I meant. Yeah. I don't think I've actually ever seen one. I mean, I have, but I mean, I hear them all the time.
I know. They're tricky to find. They are so tricky to find. Oh, wow. Lisha has the Blackburnian warbler.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Beautiful.
I'm looking forward to warbler season. I haven't seen much, not even a butterbutt.
Hello, everybody. Welcome here. So my name's Joe, and Sue and David are with me as well. I hope you've been putting all your favorite birds into the chat. Anything that you think is like your favorite spring bird or any season bird, pick that. But today, what we're going to do is learn a little bit about birds. David's with us. Before you all joined, he was letting me know that this might take about 5 days. So I hope that you are prepared for this. He's going to try to fit 5 days worth of lessons into 1 hour, which I think is amazing. He didn't actually say that, but I'm just interpreting. But David, I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can get started. Thank you for being here.
Excellent. Thank you. And welcome, everybody. My name is David Grack. I'm here presenting today with the Jeffers Foundation. So I'm going to share my presentation screen here. And greeting you from a little bit of snowy flakes in Buffalo, Minnesota this afternoon periodically. And today we're going to get into birding a little bit, talk about it as we may encounter birds as a hobby, and how we may also incorporate birds into our classrooms with our students. On occasion, you might see me kind of peeking to my right as I have a second monitor so that I can see where you are all at too, and monitor what's coming in on the chat when some of that is happening. So welcome again. I want to share a little bit about the Jeffers Foundation. I had presented earlier in January on a lesson on phenology, and the Jeffers Foundation, it's a nonprofit that promotes environmental stewardship through education, primarily through workshops called Team Teaching with Mother Nature. And we work with teachers on their school site to promote science, but also multidisciplinary lessons outdoors, just on school sites, or so school site field trips. As far as birding, I've been teaching birding. I've kind of self-taught myself when I began teaching in the late 90s, and worked with birds with high school students. And since that time, I've also worked with community ed programs, teaching K through 6 courses, typically groups of K through 2 or 3 through 6, birding classes in the summer. And I also instruct bird courses for some universities through graduates courses as well. And in 2007, as I've worked with birds and with students of all ages for many years and doing family programs and libraries and such, I developed and had a book that I wrote published called Birds of the Northwoods Activity Book. And we're going to share a couple of features of this just as a process to engage our students, whether they're first graders or fourth graders, middle school, whatever the case may be, into the steps to learn how to listen and observe with our eyes and our ears to learn the birds around us and understand why they're around. And just this past weekend and this next coming weekend, I'm working with a group with the Jeffers Foundation in our first Birding Institute for educators. First, hopefully, first of annual birding institutes. And if you'd like more information on that, feel free to check out our Jeffers website as well. It's jeffersfoundation.org. And I'll make some more reference to Jeffers Foundation as well later on in our session this afternoon. So thinking about our process and getting into rules and clues for birding and learning about birds, I just wanted to share a couple of things from this activity book, or what I call a working field guide, as students of all ages, and I've worked with this with kindergarten all the way through adults, and try to determine and figure out how can we figure out what bird might be on our school grounds, looking at size and color, collecting field notes, and understanding when or why that bird might be around, when we might see that in our neighborhood. And so here's an example of what you may see in here, and it's designed as a color by number of the different species, and just a place to add facts. And I put a drawing there because in my yard, I typically see these chipping sparrows when they arrive, kind of hanging out and just eating on seed off the ground underneath our feeders. And having our students in a place, whether it's in this book or it's in a journal or however we're collecting our data, to just think about the process. We're never done learning, and we can continue to add facts and notes. And so in my example here, I only put 3 in there because there's that opportunity for me to continue to learn and add more observations that I'm making, or to find some more interesting facts in other field guides, whether they are the paper version or they're online field guides, to learn more about the species that are visiting my yard or visiting my school grounds. So thinking about some of the questions about birds and our curiosities, what we may find as we think about how well we understand birds and what we can learn more about them. I'd like, if Leanne is available, to unmute, and I'm going to ask a couple of people to do this throughout. If Leanne would read a little excerpt here that I'm going to post here from the Bird Feeder book, which some of you may have seen or read previously. But if Leanne, if you'd take and read these sentences here, that'd be great. The importance of questions.
David, actually, I'm having trouble seeing I have your view, and I have the speaker view, gallery view, and I can exit full screen, but I can't see your.
Okay. Sue, are you seeing it? Okay.
So I'm not sure where else I should be clicking on. I'm sorry.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
as you maneuver that, I'm going to head right down
to.
I see Jenny. And if someone has a way to solve this issue for Leanne, if you'd throw some suggestions in the chat, that would be tremendously helpful.
Yeah,
Jenny, can you see this?
I can see it. Do you want me to read it?
That'd be excellent.
All right. The importance of questions. Besides your eyes and ears, the most important thing to bring to your observing is your curiosity. Questions are the driving force behind all learning, and the more you ask, the more you will learn from what you see. Don't worry too much about not having all the answers. Just continue to ask and be open to learning. It was once said that an expert is someone who is afraid to learn something new. In other words, it's better to be a good explorer than someone who believes they have all the answers. There's always more to learn.
Thank you, Jenny. And I think it's important when a lot of times when I work with teachers and they want to incorporate birds into their classrooms, and we talk about, well, how many birds would you be able to identify by sound or by sight? And some of them get kind of intimidated about, well, I don't think I know enough yet. I bird as a hobby, but how do I get my students to learn and be confident in it? And I think it's important us to look at, these are from Donald and Lillian Stokes, who have been leaders in birding for years and years, to really put this in perspective and think, yes, we can model being lifelong learners with our students, especially with topics like birds. We can see and hear things differently from day to day, year to year with our students. And thinking about, well, what are some of the reasons we can teach about birds, whether we're working first grade, like I said, any kind of grades or ages, and think about the ties we can have to ecology, bird adaptations, the visibility of them. We've had sessions in the past in these workshops with animal tracks and signs, and a lot of it are from animals that aren't always visual or available to us during the school day. Birds provide multisensory learning for us with listening and with sight, inspiration, and it also helps students to learn and adults to learn about their yards, their parks, and to maybe consider getting into citizen science. And we'll talk more about programs and resources later on. It gives us the possibility to do writing assignments about the birds, a day in the life of the black-capped chickadee, to photograph birds. Connect across generations is one thing I love. When children will talk with their parents or grandparents, and they'll have bird feeders and the stories that emerge from their love and care for birds in their yards and neighborhoods. So it provides lifelong learning. We can look at trends. Joe was talking about the millions of juncos that are invading his yard now. So look at trends with bird species throughout the year, and also our ability to teach outdoors. Those of you who are joining us from Minnesota as well can think of the over 400 species that visit our state at some point during the year, and all these different habitats where the birds can live and thrive in our state. And so we think about these reasons, our passions with questions, and birds are often visible, but they'll also leave signs around that they're in our yard or in our neighborhood or at our school grounds. So in the chat, or if you want to unmute, please submit, what are some signs that birds might leave behind, that they're hanging out, even though we're not seeing them or hearing them at the moment? What are some bird signs that might be out there for us to find? A nest, all right, that's a good order, thanks. You went right in the order I thought, right there. Broken seeds, feathers, eat marks. Tracks in the mud, holes in a tree. All right, so there's some holes in the tree. I'm trying to anticipate here what some of these things might be and see how many I kind of anticipated that you would notice. Some droppings, there you go. My group this last week, they determined it was just, are we scat or droppings? Feathers I noticed, and if we find feathers, and I'm putting up some pictures, and we can also measure and collect data as to what size these feathers might be, try to figure out what birds they might come from. Yeah, there's some of those droppings. We might find it on a window, or anybody want to sit on this bench right here? I think it's been thoroughly marked by some birds. Sounds, and somebody said tracks in the mud. Here's some from earlier, tracks in the snow that we could also measure and find out what bird might have left that. And one that I didn't see that you might find is a predator-prey interaction. And so here is remnants of that. And so here are just to show, what might this have been, and being aware to what might be happening in our surroundings, that sometimes we might even be lucky enough to see some of these predator-prey interactions. So out in our yard a couple years ago, this happened. And this was the initial picture that alerted me to, hey, I want to go out in that snow and check out what's happening. So we had this hawk that found its food, one bird eating another bird. And for some of you, it's not too gruesome, but I'm going to enlarge this first picture a little bit to look at the efficiency of this hawk feeding here, and what is left is just the beak and feathers. And then it also leaves, on this middle picture, you can see the wing marks from them and end up taking off, possibly annoyed by somebody wanting to take pictures of them. They flew away to leave the site. But looking for these interactions, and we can find these by getting outside and studying the birds that are around. And by getting outside, not only are these clues visual, but there are auditory, or the sounds that we can hear as well. Right? Did we hear that? That laughing? That bird is laughing at us, sitting inside at our computers birding, and we might hear it laugh again. And there may be other sounds the birds will make as well. And this might alert us to say, oh, what are some other signs that might be that we could attribute to this bird hanging around in our yard? So out back in our yard, we found this in the trunk of an elm tree. And so we went out to check that stuff out. We might find the bird or look for it, use some tools, and notice that, oh, here's that bird or bird very similar to it hanging out in our yard. And we think about, well, why is it here? What does it need? Why might it visit our yard? So we might go to different resources or books, and then also look at what else is it doing in our yard. And this bird likes to visit this suet feeder that's hanging on our tree. The bird doesn't live in our yard, but it comes and visits. And so this here is one of my favorite birds, pileated woodpecker, and it is coming and not only eating the suet at our feeder, but on this dead elm tree that was standing in our yard, it was finding one of its favorite foods, ants, and excavating and grabbing those ants out of that tree trunk. And so thinking about the clues that these birds are going to leave behind, there's some detective work that goes into this. And here are some detectives hanging out at Wolf Ridge. And these detectives are lucky enough to sit still, listen and notice. They're sitting at their chickadee landing and interacting with the birds as well. And maybe you've had your students interact, or you've been able to do this. These detectives can work together and ask a lot of questions. And a lot of questions come up as we're observing birds in our yards or at our school grounds. And so I'm going to put up a list of some common questions I get from students of all ages, adults that will tell me stories at different programs. They'll say, David, there's this bird in my yard and it's blue, and they start going into all sorts of facts about it. And they want me to help them determine who it is that's visiting their yards. And oftentimes I need to say, let's slow down and let's go back to this first question I'm going to ask them. Because there are lots of birds that are in our yards or neighborhoods. There are several birds I could think of that might be blue, that might be visiting their yard. But I want to find out first, how big is this bird? And often field guides will start as well with this clue. How big is the bird in our yard? And so to get our students familiar with birds, we may use, and typically field guides will use, three main, more common named birds with bird sizes. So some of our smaller or sparrow-sized birds, like the sparrows we see on the left side of the silhouette, are about 5 to 6.5 inches, which may also be some finches or warblers might fit into that category. We might have some medium-sized birds that are visiting our yards, which field guides will say, well, do you have a robin-sized bird, which is typically about 9 to 10.5 inches in size. And so I also shared in here, there's some woodpeckers around that size. The eastern meadowlark is another one that's about robin size, 9 to 10.5 inches. And then we have some that might be a large size bird in our yard, like a crow, 17 inches in size typically. And then that pileated woodpecker that was visiting our suet feeder and our tree in our backyard is around the crow size, or even just a little bit bigger. And if you are lucky enough, I've been to several schools working with students, they also are observing extra large birds like eagles that are nesting close by, or wading birds, or waterfowl and geese. And so there are different sizes of birds we can work with as that first question. to start determining, well, who is around, what clues can we use? And size is a great one. And not every bird is going to fit these categories. Sometimes we have these in-between species. And so it's this bird here in the middle, not quite the size of a sparrow, but also not quite as big as a robin. And so this cedar waxwing, about 7.5 inches in size, is kind of that middle ground. And so, but it also gives us and our students that perspective to try to figure out, okay, let's cue in on size, and then we can go back to all these other questions to look at the shape, the color, some different field markings, what the bird is doing, where you are, and where is the bird as well. And so Holly, I see Holly is here. Holly, on this next slide, could you read these two statements for us? And then we're going to work at being detectives with the following slide.
All of these clues can be collected with our eyes. Our ears can also be used to collect information about a bird. When a bird sings, it can help you spot it, and then you can begin collecting clues with your eyes.
Excellent, thank you. And so we're using these questions here, like Holly said, primarily with our eyes, but oftentimes it's our ears that cue us in that there's a bird around hanging out in our yard or at our school grounds. So one day we might be out in our yard and we hear we might think about, we might already have a name and know what that bird is just from its call or song. Let's hear it again. And now all us curious detectives might start looking around and see this. Oh, from a distance we can see this silhouette, but we might not be able to make out what its color or markings are. Now, size-wise on a computer screen can be a little tricky, but if I hold up my hand and hold up a silhouette, you'll see this bird could fit right in the palm of my hand. Okay, and so this is a smaller size or sparrow size bird. Now we need to start doing a little more detective work to find out how can we get a name to this bird. And all of a sudden it might come into view, come a little closer, we might get a better perspective and we can start to see these colors. Bluish gray. It has a field marking of a dark black cap or crown on its head. This bird is one super interesting bird because I often ask kids and adults, have you ever climbed a tree before? And when they shake their head yes, I say, oh, I see you've made it down safely. And typically when we and other birds are going to be climbing on the side of a tree, we come down with our tail or rear end first. But this bird loves to walk face first down a tree, which is a great identifying clue for number 5. What is the bird doing? So thinking about this bird in our yard, it's hanging out on the tree. It might also be coming and eating some suet, aside from picking at insects that are under that bark. So we utilize these clues, and that's great, but it's also important to use those clues to get a name for this species. So here's another picture of this bird, a very common view that you'll find in field guides of that bird snapped. And so there's this white-breasted nuthatch. And what are some facts and things about it? Well, here's that picture. It's about the size of a sparrow. It's a smaller size bird. It will nest in woodlands. It's actually a cavity nester. Doesn't typically excavate its own nest, but it'll utilize nest cavities from woodpeckers and other birds, or possibly use a birdhouse if we're lucky enough. And then when might we expect to see this bird in our yard? And we can go to range maps, and the group that presented last week showed us a lot of great things with iNaturalists and migration and mapping. Well, here's a year-round species for Minnesota and many regions around the country. So we can think about, oh, let's look for this bird throughout the year and see if what its behavior may be at different times of the year. But we should probably expect that we could see it many times throughout the year. And what might be some other birds we might see? Okay, now this bird has blue on it, but there's another one about the same size. And depending on where you might be in Minnesota, I'm guessing Joe may see one or both of these way more often than I would down in Buffalo, Minnesota. And so these two small sparrow-sized birds, They have a little bit of different field markings on their face, but they also have different colors on their chest or breast areas. And this one on the bottom is the red-breasted nuthatch, and they are more at home in a coniferous forest habitat. So we'd think about where you might see that in Minnesota versus down in the deciduous area where I am, where we would see more white-breasted nuthatches. Now, I think I've lived here for about 18, 19 years, and only on about 4 or 5 years have we seen red-breasted nuthatches come to our neighborhood. And we can maybe share more about that in a later discussion if anybody has any think about why we might see it on occasion and why we might not on other occasions. But thinking about going out in the field and noticing these things, especially in a time of migration. And right now, I'm hoping, depending on your weather, hopefully there's not too many snowflakes flying, but if you have the ability to, would like to spend a couple of minutes giving you the opportunity to go outside and make some observations, focusing possibly on your ears, or if you have access to feeders, to do some observations at your feeders, whether you're at home or school. I also have another option for you for those of you who aren't braving the elements today, or maybe don't have a location to go outside and visit. So if you have a notebook or a journal, maybe a clipboard with some paper, and you'd like to go outside and work on an exercise with your ears, I'd ask that if you want to try option 1 to put together a sound map. Now you'll notice on my map, there's no names of species, but you may put numbers and maybe, oh, bird number 1, I heard it in this spot first, and then it flew over and I heard it in a different spot. And we could look for movements or how many of species 2 you might notice while you're outside. So depending on your abilities, you may put names or you may want to number the birds, the number of birds that you're seeing or that you're hearing outside. A second option, if you have access to a feeding station, is to observe outside for 5 minutes and describe the feeders and the seed or feed type that you have out there. And then look at the individuals that are visiting. Are there any trends or possibly ranks? Or was one bird kind of being a boss to another one? What are you noticing at your feeder? You could, depending on your abilities or what's happening at your feeder, make a list of some species, or if you don't know the names, at least count or tally. What are the different species that are hanging out? And do they come to the feeder? Are they on the ground? Are they hanging out in a tree? Just to start noticing and collecting some data. Aside from the enjoyment of watching the birds and enjoying their songs, what kind of data can we collect outside? Now, those of you who do not have that an ability or a want to, because today is about 20 degrees below normal, at least here in Minnesota, for outdoor observations. If you stay here, I'm going to put on and share a live stream video for us to observe a feeding station through the Cornell website. So what I'd like to do for us, and I'm not sure what your view is on your screen, but I just placed a time up there for us, kind of a specific time. I want to give you 6 minutes and 18 seconds. And hopefully that gives you some transition time to get out there, maybe spend up to 5 minutes. That can be a challenge for us or our students to sit and listen up to 5 minutes to collect data. But if you could even get out for 3 of these minutes, that would be super. And so I am going to start my clock now. And those of you who are on camera will maybe see in a little bit. Those of you hanging around, I'm going to share a different screen here so that we can watch the bird feeders at Cornell up in Ithaca, New York. And as we're watching that, you may do option 2, or you may do a little bit of sound mapping, because there will be sound that comes through with this view as well. So I'm going to start the timer now. Those of you heading outside, good luck. And let me find. There it is, and we'll go live. There's a nuthatch in the distance. Maybe we'll visit here, and we could see it on that tree stump. And that bird sitting, oh, there, right in the front there. It is actually not related to me. If it was, it would be called the common grackle, but it is the common grackle. And so as people are coming back in, I have 51 seconds on my clock here. I just want to share a little bit about this site and looking at this. So this is a live feed, but I could rewind it a little bit. And if I rewind about 3 hours or so, 4 hours, it was snowing in Ithaca, and we had cardinals on there and other species hanging out. And so as you are trying to work yourself or with students, if there's a down period in observations, but it's a time that you had set aside to observe, you can scroll through and look for some compare and contrast of what might be happening at different times of the day as well. And this is, you can backlog and go all the way back 12 full hours on this live stream. There we go, we're at our time. So I'm gonna just pause. I'm gonna go back to our other screen here and ask for some shared observations. What are some things you noticed, whether you want to come off a mute or share some of your data in the chat? At one point, I will start it off. I noticed that there were, I think I had a count of 8 different birds sitting on the feeders there at once. So that was one of the things that I was noticing. It wasn't 8 different species, but there were 8 birds there. Any other observations you made that might have fit your style or what you were looking for? Maybe somebody did it at a specific grade level and were thinking for at their students level. Just 4 mourning doves.
You know, David, it was always quiet at our feeders, and I have like 4 or 5 different feeders out. And this time of day, it's like a half hour earlier, I would have suspected to see something. And in about another hour to 2 hours, the evening birds start coming. But it's so funny. There was nothing.
I'd like to share, I had a hairy woodpecker with his tail propped up against the feeder with the suet block, and a junco was on the tray part picking up the droppings, the little bits that the hairy woodpecker would peck off and it would land in the tray. And a bunch of other juncos that were doing their little laser call, that pew, 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 and trilling. And the Hank of the nuthatch was out there, and then chickadees flying to a feeder and then flying to a tree to take their seed or their mealyworm. So lots of activity here in Brainerd.
Brainerd, I was going to ask where you were with the juncos, because David and I were noticing we're not seeing as many juncos this week. I mean, I really haven't seen much this week in the junco land. Tammy, thanks for saying you had nothing at your feeders too.
Yeah. But we're watching birds flying through. There you go.
There you go.
Purple finch, downy woodpeckers, fox sparrows, 80 dark-eyed. Oh, that's down, Joe. I thought you said there were millions there. So
I did. I was exaggerating. I'm sorry.
So it's interesting to look at which species we might see more of in a group, or there might be one at a time. There is, and maybe I will go back and share that shortly here. If I go back and share my internet site here. They do have other videos where you can look. So this is April 7. I'm just going to show the first couple seconds because they highlighted all of a sudden, whoa, there it comes, big pileated. And then there are different interactions you can watch with the birds. And at about 40 seconds, if you watch the tube feeder with the green little perches on it right over here, we'll see a smaller bird kind of hum it. There it comes. And so then we get a little size comparison of two different species as well. So they do highlight these on the website along with their live cam as well, so that you can work on identifying birds and look for birds of different sizes and behaviors and things that are happening. So great lists and experience. Anybody else have any other ones to share before we move on with another slide?
I had a rooster call in my neighbor's yard, so that was interesting. And I had a sandhill crane that landed just while we were sitting here, but it was very quiet. It didn't call when it landed this time.
There you go. So it ended up we'd have an extra large size bird there with the crane. Very nice. Yeah. Thanks, Holly. All right, so field trip. We're all going to Holly's to go check out the sandhill cranes this evening.
Yes, we are.
On over.
So we think about some of these short experiences to collect observations with our eyes and our ears. We could develop a quick testable question, such as those of us who watch birds, we may notice that a black-capped chickadee will come, they grab a seed and leave. And so I watched them this winter once and I thought, well, how quickly do they head for cover? Because it oftentimes says that in field guides as well. So I observed a black oil sunflower seed feeder for about, I was watching it for quite a while, but during a 5-minute time span, this is what I timed them out for visiting the feeder. And on average, it was about 7.27 seconds per trip. But if you take out this outlier, it's about 4.7 seconds. And what I thought was interesting as well is that the chickadee, with these 3 highest times, it actually visited 2 or more perches on my feeders. All the other times they hit on 1 perch, grabbed a seed and left. So these are these questions. We can read about it and notice it, but we can also collect some extra data on it. And if we're lucky enough, we end up seeing chickadees hang out and land on our hand, just like it did here for Joe. And so I wanted to turn it over for Joe and anybody else for a little while. If you want to share any other tools or resources that you can use to teach about birds.
Yeah, so with the chickadee landing, it's really quite magical. And I know that other people are aware of it, but it's essentially you put cutouts of people, you put some old clothes on it, and you just keep feeding. And the birds get used to those human cutouts. You can see right behind me, there's that blue cutout that's there. And actually, if you were able to see all the way around, I think that there's maybe 21 or so cutouts that are around me. So a whole class can sit there. And it's been there for over 30 years now. We just keep feeding at the exact same spot. And so chickadees that are there have spent their entire life there, which is amazing. I wanted to bring one other thing up about the number of times that chickadees go to a feeder, that we've also at Wolf Ridge been able to band these chickadees. And we have special bands that they're called pit tags. And so they've got a little radio sort of receiver in there. So what happens is that at the feeder, it receives that, and we can count each individual bird each time that it goes there, the amount of time that it goes and the numbers of times. And that the record for the number of times a chickadee has landed on there was 356 times in one day at one feeder. That's a lot of work. Oh my gosh. So that's some of the stuff that we've been able to do with chickadees at Wolf Ridge. I'll give space to other people to add in their thoughts.
Wait time. There we go.
I'll share one that I didn't do it personally, but a teacher I know at the schools that we worked with in Prior Lake, it was so fascinating. They're 5th grade students. They marked the feeders as being fractions. So like a whole or half, quarter, 3/4. And one thing they did is like how long, how many days it took to go to half full or quarter full or whatever. So they were incorporating some fractional work, and they also got to choose different locations throughout the school grounds as to where to put them on just a shepherd's hook or a tree. And they could see, like, by the amount of food that was gone, they were inferring that that was a popular or unpopular site for a bird to eat from. And then they were trying to figure out why. And I thought that was a really fun investigation that tried to incorporate a few different skills.
Mhm. And thinking about some of the other resources or tools or technology, last week there was, if you weren't able to attend, it'd be a great video to watch on iNaturalist, to where you can map out and look at migrations, and they have just time sequenced of how birds are migrating through and where they're at in their migratory patterns. Joe and I talked as well about using Merlin, which is an app that you can use that kind of walks you through some of these questions as well. How big is the bird? And it walks you through it and then gives you some suggestions as to what bird matches what you're observing. And there's other technologies that you can use as well to incorporate and to infuse into your bird study, whether you're teaching inside or outside.
I have a question about, because I've actually never used it. Have any of you ever used eBird? I'm curious about it from anybody who's willing to share a little bit. And I see Jeff's got something he wants to show us as well, probably phenology.
eBird.
Yeah, hi. This is at my house, but I was just showing the list of birds and animals we've seen, and we've kept them over years and years. And on the list of animals, actually, I've got the dates on there. So it's really fun when they were first seen at our house. And so some of these species come back within a day or two every year. So it's really cool to be able to compare and match that, and and see how long. It's over 100 now. So
Wow,
that's a real fun thing to and track and compare.
Very nice. I see Tracy said I believe she's saying she's used eBird. Is that what you asked about, Joe? And Sue has used it?
Yeah.
Tracy, what's your experience with it? Oh, she's getting off the plane. We will make her talk then.
She's migrating right now.
See, I don't think you're going to be able to see it on my phone, but I do eBird. And what it is that you just start a checklist and you start counting what birds are at my feeder. And it's been one of my great COVID things. I've been trying to do a COVID eBird checklist every day as much as I can. And it takes 10, 15 minutes. You can bird for a lot longer. This one, you want to know more of the tools, but if you do Project Feeder Watch, which is also another app by Cornell in the winter months in particular, they even have pictures, and then you just click on the picture. So sometimes that one's a little bit easier to start with, but it's just tallying, like we've been talking about. What birds are you seeing? And kids could very much use the Project Feeder Watch and then hit the birds that they see. But yeah, Cornell has so many fascinating things. And then of course, data galore, have fun.
And I think it's great, very similar to what Jeff had shared. If you start keeping a list then of what you're noticing on your school grounds or at home, and having the kids add to that, and then comparing that with your group the next year, what you're noticing, what's the same, or why have things been a little different. And one of the things I've noticed in the fall with juncos is they oftentimes come around October 6th, at least to my backyard, but there are years where it takes them till the 12th. And then I think about those years, it's been abnormally warm and we've had these strong winds out of the south. And we're having 70-degree days, but it's super windy. And I wonder, well, if there's certain low pressure systems and such, the wind that's not allowing them to travel as fast, or, so there's weather patterns also to document along with those dates sometimes. So oftentimes when I'm writing, I'll write down first Junco and I'll write the temperature or some of the weather that's going on too, because that'll give me clues to look for and notice the next years as well. And kids often will come to school and share, what they saw on the bus ride, birds hanging out on the power lines and different things like that. And birds are a great way to engage kids in noticing and developing questions of what's happening around them. So some other resources and tools and things for you to think about, aside from you feeding or providing habitat at your homes, thinking about what you can do on your school sites as well. And if I saw, let's see here, is if Susan could read, if she could unmute, I'm going to ask you to read. So there's these questions and thinking about, well, what can we do with feeders and feeding birds? And going back again to Donald and Lillian Stokes, they talk about these 4 basic feeders. Susan, would you be able to read those for us?
Sure. 1, a hanging feeder with sunflower seeds. 2, a ground or tray type feeder with cracked corn and mixed seed. Number 3, a suet feeder, and number 4, water.
Yes, and having water. And I've read that people put out feeders, whether it's at home or at school, but if you put out and have a bird bath or a water source, it can almost triple the amount of birds that you have that will visit your locations. Won't triple the species, but it can triple the amount of birds that might come and visit your areas. And one of the things that I've noticed in my yard in the wintertime, I've had several years in January where you wouldn't expect to see robins, but they do come in and get a drink periodically. And there are some robins that are hanging out where there is some food for them, possibly some berry bushes or an orchard nearby, but I only see them in my yard because there's a water source for them there in the wintertime. So what might this look like? So this isn't a hanging feeder, but this is my seed feeder. And this is actually the feeder where I watched the chickadees and collected that data in the wintertime in those perches. So to have a black oil sunflower seeder, whether it's a homemade feeder like this, or you get some other tube feeders, a tray feeder, we say mixed seed or cracked corn, and suet, a great energy source year-round for birds, and then also having that water. And so having the birds like the robin here come and take a bath, and thinking about how you can do that on your school site. And oftentimes at schools, we don't have the ability to plug in a bird bath in the winter to keep it water in there, but teachers have found ways where they've used just a shallow metal, like an old trash can lid or a shallow dish, and you can fill that. And on the edges, if you give it a sunny spot, it will still melt around the sides, and there will be a little water on several days for the birds to also get some extra water from that. Then some extra, possibly additional feeding options that you might branch to from those standard ones. Having we were having a discussion before everybody's coming in about hummingbirds, but having food out for hummingbirds or orioles, the thistle seed feeder here for a goldfinch, or even attracting bluebirds to come up. And in this can here is mealworms to feed bluebirds. And so thinking about other ways that you can attract the birds with different food, but also, as I noted earlier, the chipping sparrows and other birds like the juncos just like to eat things off the ground or even off of tray feeders. And having different feeding options is going to increase the variety, can help sustain a variety of birds in your neighborhoods or at your schools. And aside from thinking about food and thinking about habitat construction, giving yourself and your students the chance to provide resources and habitat for the birds. So like a suet feeder or having a house, we can really extend those opportunities for our kids to take birding up as a hobby, maybe do some citizen science by collecting data at home. There is the Project Feeder Watch that Sue talked about and other programs. The Bio Blitz was talked about last week, starts tomorrow. So if you're interested in that, you might start identifying birds in your neighborhood or at school and plugging that data in. But I like to have my students build a suet feeder, other bird feeder, or a birdhouse that they could take home and then grow the opportunity to get into interests and build their interest in birds, and also build a habitat for their birds at home or at your school site. And so what might this look like? We have this bluebird here trying to get into its house, but we might have a home, and we might have a little investigation we could conduct with this house. So who used this house? Let's look at some clues. So I opened it up and we find this material inside, and pull it out. And I was doing this wasn't this spring, but this was last March. And I took it out and we can see these materials. It's a lot of moss, a couple of feathers on top. And who might have made that? Now this house has a real small opening. It's about 1.25 inches opening. So it's a very small bird that fits inside there. And magically it appears. The black-capped chickadee typically uses a lot of moss, and you can see, well, it's a pretty tall, here's the door opening, and then there's that moss nest down in the bottom. Now this same kind of house is put out in our backyard. This one's a newer model, not quite as aged as the one in the front yard, as you can tell, but there's already a clue to me, and I'll share a little bit as to who might have used this house. And maybe you can notice it on your screen, maybe not yet, but if we open it up, we check what kind of nest is in that house, and grab that and bring it out in my hand, and look at that. So there's this big pile of sticks, and then the small little cupped grassy soft part of that nest at the back. And the same house, very small opening, and we have another bird that might use that house. So we had the house wren using that same house. And my clue at the beginning, without even opening it up, I don't know if you can tell, but there are a couple of little twigs or sticks sticking out that front entrance. And that, different than the chickadee, this couple here has filled that house way up with sticks. And it's important to take those nests out so that new birds will come. I read in a field guide once, because I thought, well, birds might just reuse that same material. And somebody has observed a house wren coming to a house in the spring. They've taken every stick out of that house just to put them all back in the way they want them. And so to think about, make sure your houses, if you're putting them out, that you clean them out. And I oftentimes just sprinkle these sticks right on the ground underneath the house, so that if the next pair wants to use those sticks, they're there and they're a little bit easier to get for that bird. And so finally, the last couple of slides here, just want to think about, well, teaching about birds outdoors, we can lead to multiple days outside or possibly year-long studies. And I've had teachers utilize that bird activity book, and they work with several birds each month. And the kids are kind of working through different patterns of migration patterns, of sizes and all those kind of things. And I'll ask Sue Moan to read this last statement. Some of you may have read this book. If you haven't, it's an excellent book on bird observations and noticing the simple clues out there. And it's a book called What the Robin Knows. And Sue, if you'd read this statement.
Sure. Robins, sparrows, juncos, boring. I've heard this lament from the occasional first day student, but I've never heard it from a third day student.
Yeah, and as we ourselves are engaged in this, maybe as a hobby, or we're just birders, to the core, our students will just become more and more engaged as you continue to observe and get out and build houses or work with habitat, identify more species. So I wanted to share that, as well as one final reading here at the end. And so next week, and Joe and Sue may share a little bit about this as we move on too, but thinking about not only the data, but the inspiration and wonder that comes from observing birds. And there are several poetry books that I've found and have used over the years. And one of my favorite poems comes from this book called Feathers, Poems About Birds, and goes back to one of my favorite birds, that laughing woodpecker. the pileated woodpecker. The poem's called Wake Up! No rooster to wake us. We're not on a farm, but we have our very own feathered alarm. It drums before breakfast on shingle and pole. I think there's some rooster in woodpecker's soul. And as we end our session today, and hopefully you are able to come back next week and meet with the group next week, they're going to work with Wonder Wanders and doing some writing and inspiration. I think birds and studying birds is a great way to get out, inspire ourselves and our students to learn more about our surroundings. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing here.
Wow. David, you're amazing. I thought you said there was 5 days worth of material and you fit it all in. Amazing. So what I want to do, first of all, is thank you very much. And I also want to turn it to the crew here. If anybody has any questions or comments or resources that they think other people would find of value, this is a great opportunity if you want to share or ask to have something shared. Go for it, Leanne.
Thanks. I wanted to, I don't know, because I have a virtual background, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but for my Master Naturalist capstone project, I took photos that were from my husband's and my collection, and I made what I called the Backyards Bingo game.
Oh, fun.
Oh, we can't see it.
Oh, wait,
no.
right there, right there, right there. Good, good, good.
Yeah, so each card has the same 24 birds on it, and then the Northland Arboretum is the free spot. Whoops. And then for playing the game, we use these flashcards that have the picture and have some fun facts, 3 fun facts for each bird on the back side. So the person who's calling out the bird says, for example, okay, wood duck, and then everybody finds it on their card, and then they'll read, oh, spring male has ornately patterned plumage. So I put this game together and I donated a copy to the Northland Arboretum for anyone who does programming at the ARB. They can check this game out. So there's 25 cards, and they're all in different places. So it's weird. We've never had 2 simultaneous bingos at the same time. Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you for sharing.
Anybody else? Well, thank you all for coming. Poetry next week, Sue, right?
I know. Well, and Wonder Wander. So I'm not really sure where all of it goes.
Oh my goodness. Excellent. What a lovely setup here. I want to thank Sue and Anna for setting this up from January all the way to this point. We had so many people who reached out to volunteer, just like David, to do presentations. And then they put this magical schedule together and it just seems to flow so beautifully. I really, really love it. And David, thank you for linking everything together as well. That's what makes it magical too. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Joe, thanks for playing host all these weeks. It's been great.
Yeah. One of these days I'll stop talking, right? Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing everybody here next week for Poetry and Wonder Wanders. Excellent. Have a great day, everybody.
All right. Take care.